Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. This is a schmooze day, but I think we actually have some idea what we may want to talk about. I have two friends with me who are very big on nuclear weapons. That's not they're enthusiastic about them, but they're very preoccupied with them, as they should be. And another friend is preoccupied with various other things such as gardening and electronics, which don't necessarily go together, but in our mind they do. So, in someplace out here near Chicago, we have Ward Wilson. Hello, Ward. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay. And where are you, Jonathan?
In the suburbs of New York City.
In the suburbs, yes. All right. Jonathan Granoff is a person who's been running a very important institution. Say its title and where it's located, Jonathan, while we're at it.
With the Global Security Institute. Our main office is in New York near the UN.
All right. And I think in Scarborough or someplace very near to me is Joan Kerr. Only it looks like she's in the Caribbean. She's got this palm tree and the waves beating on the beach behind her. And it's a nice idea. Hi, Joan. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And I'm in Oshawa.
Oshawa. That's about, half an hour from me. Okay.
Right.
We are realists, and the world is full of people who believe in myths, and that will not work. So I want Jonathan to kick it off.
The concept of mythology for purposes of describing realms that are not within the realm of the five senses, the psychological and spiritual realm, they can have great value in the archetypes of overcoming negativity, that which separates us and coming to a state of harmony with the great mysteries that cannot be described in empirical terms. But the myths that I wanted to talk about is the application of mythology in our relationship among states and the application of mythology in our relationship to the natural world. So there are two myths that I want to address specifically. One myth is the belief that there are military technical solutions to the problems between states that can be achieved by the pursuit of military domination. That military nationalism, which arises from the creation of the modern state, which took place in the 17th century, in order to stop the slaughter of the people of Central Europe, fighting over whose definition or whose myth of Jesus' love was preferred. Imagine that. And that in some areas, up to a third of the population was decimated. And there were some wonks who got together and said, well, these different stories of the ultimate mystery are going to lead to the absolute destruction of our civilization as it existed. And out of that, in 1648, the nation state was created. Now, the nation state was created by people in order to address a problem of values and practicality. But when the nation state becomes an end in itself, that's mythical. And when the nation state pursues its stability by military nationalism, that myth becomes toxic, especially when you take it to its logical extension, which is based on a Roman myth that pursue peace, receive war, pursue war, receive peace. In other words, peace through military domination and strength. So this mythology that we can pursue military domination and at the same time, another myth called strategic stability, another myth which is not measurable, has brought us to the point where each day we live with this sword the sword of Damocles over our head of nuclear weapons, as 13,000 eyeballs of death looking at us, at the planet. And the idea that we can live with this in perpetuity and not be destroyed by accident, madness, or design is totally mythical in the sense that it's unrealistic. And those of us who understand that as long as some countries have nuclear weapons, others will get them. As long as they exist, they will eventually be used by accident, design, or madness. We are the realists. We are saying that this venture of the pursuit of absolute power to bring security to the military state is mythical, and we are realistic. We now know that we have to work together. The other myth is the belief of a perpetually expanding economy that is not bounded by the regenerative processes of nature. In other words, our economic system is disconnected from the natural world. It treats the natural world as if it were purely a commodity for the production of goods and services. But the natural world has its own rules. It has its own limits, and you can have plan A and plan B, but you can't have planet B. There's only one planet, and the regenerative processes of nature have to be recognized, and we have to live by those laws and those realistic systems. So that includes 50 to 70% of our oxygen comes from phytoplankton. That's our third lung. We cannot continue to risk destroying it by changing the pH of the oceans through climate change. The climate of the planet has to be protected. The rainforests, which we're cutting down faster than they're rejuvenating, is the rest of our sources of oxygen. So it is unrealistic to believe that we can cut off our third lung and survive as a species. It's unrealistic to think that we can address pandemics at a national level. A vaccine apartheid world is both morally improper, but it's also unrealistic because pandemics will find places where it's smart and it can mutate and it will come back and haunt us. We've now created an economic system to provide goods and services that's integrated globally, and yet we're not pursuing a governance system that will integrate it in a way that will not create great shocks in which the poor suffer the most. So there's a set in modernity because of the impact of science, technology, and social organization where we're melting the polar ice cap. Unbelievable. 100 years ago, if we tried to organize to do it, we couldn't do it. And we need to be realistic. And we need to have a refocusing on how we define security. It should be based on human security. Human security means recognizing our interdependence with the web of life and our dependence on the regenerative processes of nature. That's realism. Also, as human beings, we're creatures that need meaning. We're creatures that have to express the passions and desires of our hearts, and those are protected by the realism and reality of the inherent dignity of every individual, the God-given, I said God and realism, the God-given dignity of every individual inherent in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the two prongs of realism for today's world are utilizing the benefits of scientific understanding to understand our relationship to the natural world, and which we have to do. And the second is the inherent dignity of the individual. Now, this directly relates to nuclear weapons, because there is no greater impediment to the cooperation needed to be realism than the institutionalization of adversity that nuclear weapons represent. Mm-hmm. Nuclear weapons essentially represent a myth that we can threaten all life on the planet Earth to protect something we've created. The arrogance of this myth, the absolute blasphemy of it, that we would put at risk the very future of humanity to protect something that we've created, which anyone with common sense can see that our governments are valuable and we need to support them, but they're not as sacred as the web of life. We have no right to be building weapons that can destroy the web of life. That is pure mythology. It's immoral, it is illegal according to the laws we've created, and it's unrealistic, and it's mythical thinking. Beautiful. We are the realists. We are the realists.
I expect that Ward has something on this topic.
The nuclear field is an especially good example of what Jonathan is talking about, because for 70 years, the framing of the discussion is that anyone who is in favor, however reluctantly, of keeping nuclear weapons is a realist, and anyone who believes that we can eliminate nuclear weapons is an idealist, a utopian dreamer, a fuzzy-headed, bad, poor thinking, illogical, and so on. And there are reasons for this. The first two major proposals to eliminate nuclear weapons were quite idealistic. And so a pattern was set where people thought, oh, well, if it's a proposal to eliminate nuclear weapons, it must be idealistic, although that is not
Wait,
true.
hold on, because now you're going into a place that I don't know. What two proposals are you thinking of?
The first proposal was to share the secret of the bomb with the Russians in order to build trust, and therefore to avoid an arms race. And the history of the world is that technology is often important for military conquest. And the Mongols conquered the largest empire in the world because they had superior bow technology. They had a bow that could shoot farther, penetrate deeper. So I think it was foolish to suggest that you could get peace by sharing a military secret. And the second was one world or none. It was, we all have to have world government now or else we can't survive. And I think that that it's a worthy goal. From my perspective, the problem is that democratic governments are based on shared values. Even non-democratic governments are often based on shared values. And the notion that we could take all the heterogeneous cultures and peoples and subgroups and interest groups of the world and find common ground to build one government seems idealistic to me. What seems unrealistic to me is the belief that emerged from those two episodes, which was that anyone who's in favor of nuclear weapons is realistic. That's, I think, demonstrably not true. How that came about is because most of our ideas about nuclear weapons were formed during the Cold War. The Cold War was a time of enormous fear and anxiety and paranoia. And what happened is we didn't have any facts to go on. We'd used the bomb once in one war against one opponent with one style of leadership against one type of target, two cities, but the same type of target. And so effectively we had one data point from which to construct a theory about nuclear weapons, which people rapidly did. They built this giant intellectual structure. The books behind me are a tiny handful of the books that I have on nuclear deterrence. There are 500 volumes in the dining room, and they're still getting published, and people are still making stuff up based essentially on no factual information. Practical experience is what makes realism. Theory is very close to myth. Those first nuclear weapons strategists, thinkers, political leaders were operating essentially without facts in a time of enormous fear and anxiety and paranoia. So it's not at all surprising that their ideas.
What kind of facts?
It's not at all surprising that their ideas were exaggerated, misperceived. They couldn't get a grasp on it, and they let their emotions run wild. I'm sorry.
Hold on. What type of information or facts did they need that they lacked?
Look at machine guns.
What information do you need to supply that they didn't have?
Look at machine guns. Machine guns were used for 50 years before World War I in various wars, not large wars in Europe, but colonial wars, American Civil War, all kinds of conflicts. And yet, in 1914, 15, and 16, millions of young men were slaughtered because generals hadn't yet absorbed the reality of the impact of machine guns on the battlefield. Reality is you can't charge across open ground against machine guns because they'll just cut you down. It takes a lot of time and a lot of experience with new technology to figure out what its full implications are. We think we've figured nuclear weapons out, that we know that they're the most powerful weapon on the face of the earth, that they buttress alliances, that they are the mark of prestige for the top nations, blah, blah, blah. All these ideas that have been formed that are not based on, that are all based on assumption.
Yes, I know that we have to talk about nuclear weapons, but I mean, we have to go further than that and talk about the drive for power in nations, which, then, for example, the United States wanted to be the most powerful nation. There was a vacuum that was created after the Second World War. It really started before that with the fall of all the European monarchies and stuff like that. So, but that vacuum really led to a power grab. Obviously, the British Empire was falling, and their child, the United States, says, "Yeah, okay, we knew how you do it. We're going to do it, and in order to do that, we have to protect ourselves." So they didn't need to provide proof or have many examples. They just have to say, "This is our goal, and this is how we're going to do it." And this whole idea that, I mean, it was experimented. They wanted to do. They had, we all know that they took the German engineers and worked with them, even though they were Nazis, and worked with them to create with the knowledge that they had. It didn't matter that they didn't go to jail or anything like that. It was the power that they were grabbing that they forgot about all of the other issues that we're all talking about. Peace, morals, ethics, leadership. I mean, one of the things that, if we're going to talk about myths and legends, I know that we're not talking about them in its entirety, but when we think about countries and how we're destroying the earth, as Jonathan says about, regenerative, we have to make decisions about being regenerative. In the Bible, if you are religious, and I'm not, so I want to make that clear, it says that man has dominion over the earth. That's a pretty big incentive to say that we're the best, and we don't really have to be responsive to other species. So I guess what I'm saying is that how do you talk about nuclear disarmament to the general public when they believe that it's security? It's been brainwashed in them to think that we need to have that. Not want to, we need to have it. I mean, I think that when the US invaded Iraq, the bureaucrats said if we did have nuclear weapons, they would not have invaded us. Right?
Well,
I mean, that was a significant thing to say.
Mhm.
So,
So are we going to talk about deterrence, or we're going to talk about the importance of nationalism, or the sense that the nation state is autonomous and sovereign, and there's no way. I got from what Ward was saying that it was a big mistake to think that we could have any kind of real global governance where we would bring together all these different societies with their very different cultures.
Ward was talking about the factual basis upon which decisions were made. And so one of the facts, for example, that we now know is based on the climatologist analysis of 1% of the arsenal being used now, say a robust exchange between India and Pakistan. And what the climatologists are telling us, and these are facts that should be the basis of policy, is that if 130 of these bombs were to go off, and they were to go off in cities, which is where they would go off, it would throw a minimum of 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere, thus rendering the agricultural base of our civilization on the planet Earth irremediably destroyed. Now, that's a fact. That's a fact. That means that a nuclear war can never be won. And even a small exchange of a small portion of the world's arsenal cannot be used and survive. Now, that's a fact. And when these policies were created, the risks inherent in deterrence were not realized. In fact, I remember in the 1950s being taught when I was in school that all I needed to do in the event of a nuclear exchange was get under my desk, duck, and cover, and I'd be okay. Talk about unrealistic thinking, because they didn't have the facts at their disposal. So I'm just interjecting as an example, because we took Ward off message. I know he was going somewhere, and I'm just giving one example of facts not being the basis of an entire edifice of all kinds of theories ultimately justifying what we're facing now in the United States, a $1.9 trillion commitment to make the weapons more usable, more accurate, and clean, reliable, efficient, all of these words that you'd like your car to be, but they're really talking about destroying the world.
They're not totally out of it. They are trying to recognize that a big nuclear war would be catastrophic. And so they want to figure out, can't we have a little tiny nuclear war? And they actually, when Putin is talking about using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, I'm pretty sure he's not talking about using a Bravo type of weapon. He's talking about using one of these tactical nukes, which I believe they now have them down to a small fraction of the size of the Hiroshima bomb. That is something that is theoretically possible that you could just shoot out of an artillery gun, and it would be, he would do one of them just to show that he could do it and get away with it, and that would not cause the end of the world. It might, unsettle those of us who worry about the idea that it could escalate, but it isn't unrealistic. They are taking account of the fact that big ones are impossible, but maybe little ones are not totally impossible.
Well, this exemplifies the problem exactly, because what nuclear weapons are 80, 90% of the time is symbols. They appear in our minds, they loom in our minds large, they are powerful and controlling in our minds. We don't have much reality. And it's actually worth noting that nuclear weapons have not been used in 75 plus years. Even though the United States fought a bunch of wars, Russia fought a war in Afghanistan. The Israelis fought a war for their survival in the Middle East. The British fought a war with the Argentines, and yet nuclear weapons were not used. Imagine having the ultimate weapon, and fighting all these wars and having all these young men go off to war and die and come home in boxes, and yet you never use that ultimate weapon. Maybe you don't use it because there's some moral taboo against using them, or maybe the reason you don't use them is that the reality is they're not very good weapons. Problem with nuclear weapons is they're too big. Bigness is impressive, but it's tough to use. When a plumber works on a problem in a house and he sends his assistant to the truck to get a tool, he doesn't say, Darren, bring me the biggest tool for the job. He says, bring me the right tool for the job. And what happens when we get absorbed with looking at the symbol is we forget to look at, well, what really are these weapons actually useful for that they could do in war that would be effective? The majority of tactical land-based nuclear weapons in the Russian arsenal are 10 kilotons. That's 2/3 the size of the Hiroshima bomb. 10 kiloton weapon. The area, the circle of maximum destruction, I think, is something like 1.5 miles. And the circle of moderate to extended destruction reaches out as far as 4 or 5 miles.
Mhm.
That means you can't use this weapon on the front line because you'll kill your own guys. And in fact, the radiation from the explosion can spread 25 miles downwind in an hour, which means you can't even use them pretty far back from the front lines because the radiation could blow back on your own guys and kill them.
Well, okay, what are the smallest ones they have? I mean, let's assume that he's actually that Putin is rational, which is I don't think he is, but nevertheless, he may be rational enough to say, well, maybe I want the tiniest nuclear bomb that I can use, and just use it to show that I'm willing to use one. And
Which
in
would
that
be
case, how big is the tiniest one?
kiloton. But the fact is, with a tiny nuclear weapon, what you're doing, what you're accomplishing, besides the symbolic part, could be done with conventional bombs.
Sure, but it wouldn't have the same symbolic meaning. You got it.
Well,
Exactly.
but the fact is, symbolism isn't the same as utility. Symbolism isn't realism. The problem with symbolism, I always think of Patroclus. Patroclus was Achilles' friend, and you may remember that Achilles went to his tent and he wouldn't fight, and the Trojans were winning and the Achaeans were being driven back. And Patroclus goes to Achilles in his tent, and Achilles is moping. And Patroclus says, well, come on, bud, you got to fight, or whatever he said in ancient Greek. And Achilles said, I won't fight. I won't fight. Patroclus says, well, can I borrow your armor? And Achilles says, okay, all right. And he takes the famous shield and he puts on the plumed helmet and he goes out to the battlefield, and the Trojans see Achilles
Mhm.
and they fall back and they're afraid. And then Hector says, I don't care. I've got to fight him. I'll go ahead. And he goes out to confront Achilles. And I think it's Apollo sneaks up behind Patroclus and knocks him down. He doesn't hurt him. And Patroclus's helmet comes off. The Trojans see that it is not the great Achilles, and they run him through with spears. And the moral to the story is, I want my country defended by reality, not symbolism,
Uh-huh.
because symbolism only works as long as people believe in it. And people can change their minds about symbolism at the drop of a hat. So
I love that story. I don't know that story. Thank you for
Well.
that. That's a good myth.
Well, see, the problem with mythical symbolic weapons is you end up overestimating their importance and ability and all this stuff and their think about deterrence. You don't have to be a 12-year-old to see that deterrence will eventually fail. Human beings are fallible. Everyone knows this. Human beings are involved in deterrence. We make the threats, we evaluate them, we decide how to respond.
You know, I remember, I used to threaten my 4-year-old, you don't do this or else what I'll do is something or other, we won't go to the park or you won't have dessert or something. I've forgotten. And sometimes it worked, but sometimes it didn't work.
If human beings are fallible, and we are, and if human beings are involved in nuclear deterrence, and we are, then nuclear deterrence is inherently fallible. It will fail. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. That's the reality that is plain as day. And yet 40, 50 years of nuclear strategists have said, well, we can make nuclear deterrence work. We can keep, it'll go on for 100 years. It's okay. And that's not realism.
Yeah.
That's some kind of faith or religion or anyway.
Okay.
Marty, there's a professor emeritus at Stanford, Dr. Marty Hellman, who is one of the guys who created the encryption system of the internet that allows us to have this talk. And he is pushing to have a reevaluation of national and international security based on statistical analysis of risk, a risk analysis, the kind of thing that insurance companies do. And there's nobody in this field, given the number of near misses we've had, computer errors and human errors, computers, a chip that Bill Perry has written about that couldn't distinguish between a sunrise and a full-scale launch against the United States. And the only reason we didn't blow ourselves up is that he had the wherewithal to call the facilities, the radar facilities that said there's nothing coming over the horizon. It turned out there was a computer chip that was faulty. It hadn't been programmed to distinguish between a sunrise and a missile launch, or a cloud formation that informed Russians that we were full-scale launching against them, or the Cuban Missile Crisis based on flawed analysis of photos. The missiles were operational in Cuba, and had our Joint Chiefs of Staff had their way, we would have invaded and we wouldn't be here today. So the point is that there is enough facts to do a raw statistical analysis of the likelihood of a mistake leading to annihilation. And all of the statisticians say it's at least 1%. So I ask anybody, would you get on an airplane if they told you when you bought your ticket, oh, by the way, there's a 1% chance that this plane is going to crash? You wouldn't do it, because in reality, it's like a 0.0000001% your plane's going to crash. Planes are pretty safe. Driving your car is pretty safe. But if you were told this is a 1 in 100 chance this plane's going to crash, you wouldn't get on the plane.
Yeah.
And yet every day we rely on the mythology that deterrence is making us safe. That's the kind of facts we.
Yeah, but
that's
the
kind of
problem,
facts that
Jonathan,
we
is
don't have.
you wouldn't get on a plane because you have good sense. But the guys who've invested their lifetime career in building these things and promoting them, you tell them 1% and they'll say, well, piffle. So what? They are not going to be deterred by reality. They
That's
have
right.
an investment.
That's our point. That's precisely our point. And we're trying to change the debate so we can debate them.
Mhm.
I think we win the debate, at least whenever I've been able to debate these people, they just fold because they don't have rational positions. And
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is Ward has not been able to get the microphone. I haven't been able to get the microphone. The people who get the microphone are high school kids talking about their sentiments.
Mhm.
Right now we even have the left fighting, with political correctness. We don't put our best advocates forward. We
Mhm.
put people forward because of their age and gender and color and things. Damn it, I want to win. It's serious business.
I
It
get
is serious business.
Yeah.
So the issue would be that to go to those people and educate them, so when they have the microphone, they can tell their reality
I wish,
stories.
Joan, I wish that was the motive. I wish the motive was we want to win on these issues. One of the issues that's legitimate is everyone should be heard. Everyone has a right to be at the table.
Absolutely.
That's
I
a
agree.
legitimate issue. But
And
when
it is
the
a-
house is
yeah.
on fire, you want the guys who can turn on the hoses and put the fire out.
I agree, but people don't want to listen to multi-stakeholders. They want to listen to people who solidify what it is that they're trying to do, and that the real issues are not dealt with, so that they're held accountable. That's what I found in all of the campaigns that I've done.
I think one of the things, I just want to let Ward finish something that everybody should know. One of the main myths is that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended World War II. That is really important because that's the foundation of the whole story. Nuclear weapons are horrible, but look, we saved millions of lives. And that myth has been that's like John Wayne and apple pie in America.
Mhm.
But it's all over the world, people have it. And Ward is one of the experts on what actually happened. And I would like you to, I really think that's important for people to know this.
Go with it, Ward. Tell us.
If nuclear weapons were a religion, Hiroshima would be the first miracle. Have a stubborn adversary, try all kinds of things, blockade with submarines, city bombing with conventional bombs, fire bombing, repeated military defeats, and they still won't surrender. And you bomb them with 2 of these magic weapons, and 2 days later they say, we're going to surrender. And so what could be more clear than that? Except they weren't shocked. They weren't shocked by the bombing. And the reason, what happened is the Soviets had a neutrality pact with Japan for 5 years. They canceled it the night of the 8th, Wednesday, August 8th, and declared war. And the next day we bombed Nagasaki. But by that point, the Japanese had already heard that the Soviets had invaded with 1.5 million men. They were making inroads in Manchuria. In some cases, they didn't even stop till they ran out of gas. They were attacking in Sakhalin Island. The estimate was that they would be in Japan, in Hokkaido, within 10 to 14 days. And the Russians were not going to let the Japanese keep their religion, their state religion. So what would you rather do? Surrender to the Americans, who are nice liberals and they might let you keep your emperor, or the Soviets, who don't believe in religion and who are going to say, no, you're all going to be communist? So it was a very straightforward, pragmatic decision that they made. And a lot of times, I talk to, it's a measure of how blindered the nuclear community is. I talked to experts. I debated a guy, a renowned scholar in the United Kingdom, on this in 2013. And he said, well, but of course they surrendered because of the bomb, because the emperor said they surrendered because of the bomb. And it is true. In his radio broadcast on the 15th to the people of Japan saying they had to surrender, he said the Allies are using a new and most cruel bomb. So that's one of the reasons why we have to end the war. And in the debate, I embarrassed this guy because he was unaware that 2 days later, a second official pronouncement was sent out to every military officer, every soldier, every sailor, and read out loud that said, we have to surrender because of the Russians. So here you have the emperor himself contradicting his own testimony. So how can you sort out between, and of course, what he was saying to civilians is, who care about city bombing, we have to surrender because they're bombing our cities. What he was saying to military people who care about winning the war, we have to surrender because now we can't win the war. And so he was just talking to what his audience was interested in. I told this guy, I made this point in the debate. It was a stinging point. His latest book on the evolution of nuclear strategy came out recently, and he made the same argument again. This is one of the reasons why you can't talk to nuclear weapons experts, because it is a religion. They don't hear you. They can't absorb the facts. Mm-hmm. And so the solution is not to argue with them. The solution is to create arguments that we can take to every farmer, every postal worker, everybody who has an interest in staying alive, and say, look, it's plain as day. They're stupid weapons, and deterrence will never last. You can't really use them militarily. All the evolution in the current military field is towards smaller, smarter, more discriminate weapons. No one wants to build bigger, more blundering weapons. Obviously, they're not useful weapons, and they're dangerous. Who keeps technology that's not very useful and dangerous?
I guess my feeling is, I'm not a nuclear expert. I will admit that, but my first response to what you've just said, and I think it's fact and realistic and all of that stuff, so I'm not going to question that, and I'm not going to challenge you or in any way. But my response would be, is that the only way that the US could get the Japanese to surrender, by killing so many people to make a point that the Russians are coming in 14 days?
Well, whether or not the US was right.
Jones, we had already bombed, we'd already firebombed over 60 cities.
Yeah.
The firebombing of
we firebombed 68 cities. And if you graph all the people immediately killed in those 68 attacks, Hiroshima is second. The firebombing, the conventional firebombing of Tokyo, is first. If you graph the square miles destroyed, Hiroshima is sixth. If you graph the percentage of the city destroyed, Hiroshima is 17th. Toyama, 99.5% destroyed, was completely devastated by firebombing. But we don't know that because all we know is the magic of were they right to use the bomb? Absolutely not. City bombing is wrong, particularly city bombing where
Oh, well,
it
I
wasn't
saw
really a
a
military target.
yeah, I saw a documentary where the US also played games. And I'm not picking up for the Russians at all because, like I said, I'm not an expert on war. Um, the US were discussing peace with one group, and then they, anyway, I don't want to get into all of this history stuff because to me, it's done. What did we learn about what happened? That's morely.
Okay, this is what we learned. Our military learned that they could perpetrate a mythical story in order to build a huge arsenal. They believed that we would have such an arsenal that nobody would challenge us. They believed that they could keep the science and technology at a national level. But the basic myth was that by using these weapons, we stop the war. That was the basic myth. The fact is that the method of, we had destroyed any defensive systems in Japan. So we could go to cities, and our system was to bomb in a circle, which created a huge fire in the city, and the city imploded. That's what we did to Tokyo. It was more destructive than Hiroshima. So the argument that our capacity to inflict pain on the Japanese to get them to surrender is not true. What is true is that the Russians were on their border announcing that they were going to invade. So the Japanese had a choice before them. Either the Americans will take us over eventually, or the Russians, and we'd rather surrender to the Americans. That's the truth. The myth is that the atomic bomb ended the war. That's what they learned. They learned they could perpetrate this myth.
And then the Japanese told us it was the bomb because, which would you rather say? You're the emperor of Japan. Would you rather say, well, we didn't fight very well, we made some bad strategic decisions, the Army and Navy really never coordinated very well, they were always infighting, or the enemy made an amazing scientific breakthrough that no one could have predicted, and that's why we lost? It makes the perfect excuse for losing. So
and save face for the emperor.
Yes.
And actually they made a good choice because what did the United States do then? We did something of virtue. We had a Marshall Plan. And rather than what we learned from World War I was punish the vanquished, and you end up with the whirlwind of Nazism.
Right.
In World War II, we had some wise generals who said, let's build their economies, let's institute fundamental human rights and democracy. We ended up with trading partners and allies. So we learned some virtuous things too. But imagine and so the Japanese looked at these two cultures, and obviously there was the possibility, and it turned out to be good for them. This is a thriving country now. We did not put reparations on them. We didn't say, pay us back for the for Pearl Harbor, et cetera. We said, we'll build your economy. They made a good decision.
Yeah.
I got a real problem with that. I don't know what to do because I really think, I was just talking to a guy in Poland about the denial of guilt. I think Germany is the only country that has really understood that what they did in World War II was horrible. And they acknowledged it. They've tried to make reparations. They've done all kinds of things that no other country does. Now, I think, what's going to happen in Russia right now is what is happening right now is creating a guilt that the Russians are going to someday have to come to terms with. What they're doing is backing something that's horrendous. But on the other hand, they backed Stalin, and they never really came to terms with Stalinism. I mean, there are people, lots and lots of people in Russia now. The majority of people will say the most wonderful leader that Russia ever had was Stalin, and to this day. And the Japanese have never felt guilty about their role and things like the rape of Nanking and the bombing, of Pearl Harbor and so on. There's never any sense of guilt. So somehow people have to recognize culpability before they can really turn over a real new leaf and be responsible and be, from my point of view, respected. I can never truly respect anybody who has not acknowledged guilt after, if they really deserve to acknowledge it and that they've really done wrong. I mean, I might pretend, I might be civil, I might act as if I'm not holding it against them, but it's there. And it will always be there until I know that they've acknowledged what they did is wrong.
And I get that. It's interesting to me that your first response to the argument about Hiroshima was that they hadn't acknowledged their guilt, or that they didn't realize that they were wrong, because the argument that I often make is a purely utilitarian one. The weapons don't work. They're not smart weapons, and they'll kill us eventually. But there is some moral component. And I think that that moral component, in a hidden way, sits at the heart of the position of nuclear weapons advocates, the people who say we should keep them. They say that we've sinned and we cannot undo the sin. And it sits at the heart of the opponents who say that this was an enormous wrong. I think that the sin component is important, and that it has to be addressed. And I think that there is a way for the United States to walk back from hell.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a step that they could take that would be just retribution for what they've done. And I think that that step is to lead a movement to abolish nuclear weapons in the world. That the admission that nuclear weapons are not good weapons and were always stupid weapons, and the work necessary to persuade the rest of the world would be acknowledgement that it was wrong to build the weapons and that we should not have.
Oh, I love that idea. And I was 12 or maybe 14 years old when Hiroshima happened. And I remember being thrilled. Oh, goody, goody. That means we're going to end the war sooner. Mm-hmm. And my parents worked for the U.S. Army, Air Force, supplying the materials. They may have even helped send the stuff that was in the bomb. I don't know. But so nobody that I knew felt guilty about that Hiroshima bombing or Nagasaki bombing. Nobody felt guilty. It was years. Must have been 5 years before I heard anybody say that was wrong. Well, now, I think the rest of my life has been a matter of atoning for the shame I feel about having been so pleased about this terrible thing,
I think there's something. Go ahead. I've talked too much already.
No. I love listening to both of you, all three of you. I'm learning a lot, so I just want to say that first of all. Jonathan, I wondered why you use the terminology myths and mythology as opposed to, say, legend. And the reason is, when I think of mythology, I think it's 100% made up. And when I think of legends, I think of half-truths. Mm-hmm. Because I'm thinking, because I'm a lover of mythology and folklore and legends. And the reason why I'm asking that question is, how do you inform the public and get people on your side if you're talking about myths, which is totally made up, whereas you can say, if it's a legend, you can say dismantling truth from myth. I just wondered why you chose that particular word.
Because I hadn't thought of the alternative that you just put forward. Thank you. But you got the point, and I got your point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's good to state, let's look at facts and let's look at theories that are derived from facts. And there's a lot of denial of facts. Look at climate change. You have people who simply are denying the facts. I didn't understand, by the way, I didn't understand the facts of climate change until I went up to Greenland. And I saw hunks of ice the size of buildings crashing into huge, powerful rivers of billions of gallons of the purest water on the planet Earth to our oceans. The scale of it, I could not grasp the scale of it. And I thought to myself, if somebody 100 years ago had said, a mad person said, let's organize ourselves and release the water in the polar ice cap. Let's figure out how we can incentivize increasing the temperature of the planet Earth and change the entire living systems of the planet. Let's incentivize heating the planet. Imagine that. Somebody would say, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we'll use fossil fuel and we'll organize and we'll burn as much as possible. We'll create traffic jams where thousands of people just sit there every morning for an hour and just burn fossil fuel. No, we won't allow mass transit. We won't allow, and then we'll have military exercises and massive amounts of using this stuff. And we won't tell anybody about it, right? You would have said, oh no, you couldn't possibly do it. And then I thought to myself, my God, we've incentivized an economic system that's doing this. So that's why I go back to, we need to redefine security based on human beings. My only distance between myself and Ward is, I think that nuclear weapons are a 1930s physics and a 1940s technology. And military planners have not been in retirement since the nuclear age began. They've sitting around with new forms of allowing less people with less resources in less time to do more damage. And there's weapons sitting on the shelf. So the issue is, are we going to organize ourselves in such a way that we incentivize cooperation, that we incentivize conduct that protects the environment, rather than careers and status based on inventing more destructive weaponry? I mean, that's what we have right now, because our definition of security is based on the focus of the national military state rather than people. So you look at the nuclear posture review, it says, we want to make sure that the weapons are safe and secure. Wait a minute, I would like a security statement that says, we want to make sure the people are safe and secure. So I think the issue is, how do we change from a militarized culture to a culture that's realistic? And
well, one thing
is
that
is good. I agree with you, by the way.
Oh, great, thanks. I think, and I brought this up yesterday. It was the 4th of July. It was not the good time to bring it up, but anyway, I was on a call, and I'm thinking that we should have more heroes and heroines in peace. People highlight those people, because everyone was talking about the military heroes, and there is so much in our culture that is about honoring and those people. And you know, the thing that struck me was all of those people in community, all of those volunteers that put themselves out every day, people who are on refugee camps that are trying to help. They're heroes and heroines, and they're the people that are touching people and feeling it. It's easy to use a gun and shut somebody from, or using a weapon and, you know, touching a button, and you have no feelings. You're seeing the effects of it. It's like a game. The feelings aren't there. So I guess that's what I was getting at in terms of the legend, is how do we get from a culture of worshiping these heroes, because that's an incentive as well, not just the weapon itself, it's the person, it's the people who are there. How do we change that?
One of the things I think about when I think about getting rid of nuclear weapons is what an enormous shot in the arm it would be. Here's this 70-year failure, 75-year failure. We know they're dangerous. We know they're a threat to civilization, and yet we've been powerless. And if we could get over that hurdle, it would give us the encouragement and the confidence to get over other hurdles, to do better on climate change, to do better on world governance, to work together better, to be less obsessed with killing and more interested in. I think that we need a big success. I think we need.
Joan, I've tried. I'm with you. I gave a speech at Oxford in support of a peace chair. They have a chair in war studies, and so I was at a big meeting at Oxford University, and they had very high level speakers, and I was one of the main speakers. And I began and I said, well, you have a chair in war studies, and it's been very successful in promoting war and teaching people the art of war and teaching people the art of threatening war as an illusion of the pursuit of peace. Why go around the back of your head to scratch your nose? Why don't you have a chair in peace studies? The problem is the chair in war studies has institutions that can fund it because they benefit from it. We haven't made the case that peace is productive. I met with the president of Mexico, and I proposed to him that there should be a day honoring Ambassador Garcia Robles, created the first treaty making a huge portion of the earth nuclear weapons free.
Oh, the Treaty of Tlatelolco. Yeah.
And there are now the Treaty of Pelindabra making Africa free. The Treaty of Rarotonga making the South Pacific nuclear weapons free. The Treaty of Astana making Central Asia nuclear weapons free. The Treaty of Bangkok making Southeast Asia nuclear weapons free. How many people know that there's 115 countries making virtually the southern half of the planet Earth nuclear weapons free? They don't know that. So I said, why don't you, the first guy that did it, won a Nobel Peace Prize. The context was at a Nobel Peace Prize summit in Mexico. That's where I'm the senior advisor to the summits of the Nobel Peace Prize winners. So I had a meeting with the president. And you know what my problem was? He didn't know what I was talking about.
Why?
He didn't know that they had an international figure of tremendous influence who should be, I said, every high school kid in your country should take pride in this. So he passed me on to somebody else. The reason is simple. The reason is simple. Lockheed, Raytheon, TRW, there's money in pay to play. It's, that's the problem.
Just me, I do food gardens and grow gardens, teach people how to grow food. And yes, we do use technology to increase crop production. But we also, for our garden, we donate the food to food banks, volunteers, and the Royal Canadian Legions. That's what we call them. And we refuse to participate in the military. That's what they're for, the Royal Canadian Legions. They're about people who came back from wars, and you can join them. But we promote, we meaning my organization that I run, which is called the Foundation for Building Sustainable Communities. We promote the peace side of it, and we host the National Peacekeepers Day for Canada. Canada has a National Peacekeepers Day, and we started in 2009. And what we did was interviewed all of the peacekeepers in the Korean War, and it was first. It was the first time anyone had ever given them any attention. Mm. Isn't that the 2009? Mm. I think that there's a place to start to promote peace. And
there's a place to promote it. There's a place to promote human security.
Yes,
that resonates.
I like.
So
that.
Let me give you an example, Joan. I did the press conference for the CTA 3 weeks ago, the Consumer Technology Association. Which has like a conference of 250,000 people each year in Las Vegas, right? They're main human security and they're going to give awards to industries that make technologies that are a benefit to human security.
Thank you all. It's been fascinating. And next time we'll have a game plan session where we have to actually come with with the calculators and figure out how we're going to do it. Okay, doke?
Thank you, Meta.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. And nice meeting you
Thanks,
guys.
Joan.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode number 471. You can watch or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. And we post the transcripts there eventually. When you get there, look around. We have conversations going on there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.